Hi, my name is Bob Elliot, and I'm a reporter here in the state of Maine. No, I don't do the doom and gloom side of the news. I cover the human interest beat. And as far as I'm concerned, it's about the best job in the world. Each day I get to travel around the state looking for interesting and unusual stories. I'd like to show you a few of my favorites, starting with the summertime stuff. First up, how about a raft trip down the Penobscot River?
My name's Matt. I'd like to welcome you all to a day of rafting with the New England Whitewater Center here on the West Branch of the Penobscot.
You start this raft trip by getting a wetsuit, a life vest, and a crash helmet. If that doesn't get your heart pounding, the safety-meeting horror stories will.
The upstream tube can get pushed underwater by the current, and then your raft wraps around that rock. The lucky ones fall out and swim at that point. The unlucky ones are left sitting on top of the raft in the rock in the middle of the river trying to figure out how to get to shore.
At this point, you start wondering if this raft trip was such a good idea after all. But you can't very well back out now, so you suck it up and head off to do battle with the mighty Penobscot. They call the first set of rapids the Exterminator. Nice.
It's a pretty gorge. If you get a chance, take a look around. Both ahead hard, both ahead hard. Dig in on the right, both ahead.
We made it through the Exterminator not because of our skill, but because we followed the commands of our guide, Matt Holstein. He's been running this river for 10 years now, and when he says paddle left, paddle right, or hold on, you best do what he says, particularly on a nasty little stretch of water known as the Crib Works.
Woo! Both ahead, you guys, this water is dynamite. You're in for a treat. Both ahead hard now. Hit it hard. Dig in. Dig in. Dig in on the left. Dig in. Keep digging. Keep digging. Back left. And hold on now. Hold on. Hold on.
About the time your arms are ready to fall off, they break for lunch, a nice little steak and salmon cookout. That gives you time to catch your breath and build up some energy for the afternoon session. During the afternoon run, your fear gets replaced by confidence. Bring on those rapids, swirling, crashing, spinning. This gets to be more than just a survival game. This gets to be fun.
Back right, dig in on the left.
The people at the New England Whitewater Center put on quite a show. You get to see one of the prettiest spots in Maine and have your adrenaline worked up all at the same time. It's a great experience. I almost hate to leave. Maybe I'll take just one more run.
Back right, and hold on now, hold on.
Now, if rafting is too fast for you, you can always slow things down by taking a nice, easy windjammer cruise on Penobscot Bay.
Come ahead, 1200, straight.
We started our cruise in Rockland. At least I think it was Rockland. The fog was so thick we could have been anywhere. Some of the passengers were a bit leery about this weather, but not Captain Files. He'd seen it like this before, even laughed about it.
There's a fog machine that just starts offshore. We pump it up. We like to give everybody the experience of the Maine coast.
A little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything, yep. It's a fog machine that comes in. Actually, we haven't left the dock.
The Victory Chimes is a pretty rugged ship. It was built in 1900 to carry lumber. Now it carries passengers and is the last three-masted schooner on the East Coast. Despite the bad weather, the passengers seem to be enjoying this adventure.
I never get tired of sailing in Penobscot Bay. It's great fun to gunk hole, and there's something different every time you're out.
If you're looking for fast-paced action, you probably won't find it on a Maine windjammer cruise. There's no gambling, no nightclubs, no rock and roll. What you get on this trip is peace, quiet, and some of the most spectacular scenery on the East Coast. When you can see it. Right now, I think we're lost. We may have been lost, but the captain wasn't. Slowly but surely, he was taking us north by northeast up to Bucks Harbor for the night.
Stand by in the main sheet. Scandalize the main. Centerboard up.
We anchored for the night and went below, the theory being that if you can't see anything, you might as well eat. After a big dinner and a good night's sleep, the weather changed. We woke up and found sunshine, blue skies, and wind. We left Bucks Harbor and set sail for Islesboro. Now, paradise can only last for so long before the fates get angry and hit you with stormy weather. We're talking heavy winds, high seas, and all hands on deck, or the minnow would be lost. The ship took a few hits, but nothing too serious, and before long it was smooth sailing again, at least for a while. You see, there's never a dull moment on a windjammer, and the Victory Chimes is no exception. Just the same, I give this adventure and this ship 5 stars, because it's like sailing the coast of Maine on a museum. From the coast, we move to the mountains for a story about llama trekking in Bethel. What a deal. You take the hike, the llamas carry the load.
Boy, talk to him.
Are you tired of the city, caught on the treadmill? If so, maybe you ought to think about llama trekking in the White Mountains.
Come on, Bob, catch up.
Now, you find these llamas at a place called the Telemark Inn in Bethel. It's owned and operated by a guy called Steve Crone. It started back in the 80s when Steve dropped out of the business world, landed in the White Mountains, and set up a trekking business. He began with 1 llama, now he's got a whole herd. I headed out with a male named Mocha, but not before I got the llama ground rules straightened out.
The Mocha is like, he'll float behind you like a helium balloon. Okay, he's really well trained, he swims, he's taught all the other llamas to do what they do. The only one rule you got to know about Mocha is don't infringe on his personal space. You don't want to be grabbing or touching how soft he is. Dealing with Mocha like that is perfect. Is he okay, Mocha?
Mocha.
What do you do?
You and I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Llamas originally come from the Andes in South America, where they're considered to be very spiritual creatures. I can see why they sort of look like something from outer space. Then again, they probably say the same thing about us. You see, these animals are awfully smart, but quirky. For example, they don't like to be touched, but they love it when you talk to them. Odd.
Llamas know their names, and they like to hear it. It's like a Dale Carnegie course. It's the most pleasing sound in the world to them. So make sure Mocha hears his name every now and then.
Okay, Mocha.
Come on, Amadeus.
The great thing about llama trekking is that they do all the work. They carry the packs. All you have to do is glide along, enjoy the scenery, and listen to Steve Crone talk about the White Mountains.
You can pull up a cucumber, and they're really tasty. They're quite good. There's a pile of them here, so...
So you're kind of like a
Losing
Yule
one.
Gibbons, too. I mean, you
Anyway,
sort of do it all.
Anything for my llamas.
After a couple hours on the trail, you stop for lunch. On most hiking trips, that means a handful of gorp and a bologna sandwich. But on this trek, you get the full spread.
Grey Poupon? What is this, some kind of commercial?
Let's eat.
Unbelievable.
Grab a plate.
After lunch, you get to cool off in one of those clear blue mountain streams that you always hear about. Then it's rolling, 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 back on the trail.
Talk to you, llama. guys are doing great. Come on, Alfonso.
The second part of this trek gets a bit tricky, as you have to lead your llama around a number of natural hazards and water holes.
Nice and easy. Right in the middle. Llama trekking beaver dams. Moose poop ahead. Drive slow.
It doesn't take long to get the hang of this llama business. It's just teamwork. 6 legs moving through the mountains like they had eyes.
Keep them out of those big boulders, Bob. He got it. Come on, Oak, let's go. All right. Way to go. You're a trekker now, man.
The Telemark Inn offers a 1-day trip, a 3-day trip, or a 7-day trip. Legend has it that after the 7-day trip, you actually become part llama. That wouldn't surprise me. These creatures have a way of growing on you. There's no doubt about it, this llama trekking is quite an experience. Compared to what most of us do every day, it's like being on another planet.
Come on, Speedcraft. That was a great river crossing.
It may not look like it so far, but most people have to work pretty hard in Maine during the summertime, particularly lobstermen and lobster kids, as you'll see in this next story from Bailey Island.
There's a new lobster team out on Bailey Island this year. Meet Clayton Johnson and his great-granddaughter, Kendra.
I can do that.
Pull it right up taut, that's it.
Between them, they've got 62 years of experience. Clayton started in 1931. Kendra started last week.
Push it. Push it. Watch it, don't get around that stuff there. Okay.
As you might expect, this odd couple gets a lot of strange looks out on the high seas. Is it any wonder? Most men this age have long since retired. Most kids are still on the playground. But not Kendra. Her father, her grandfather, and her great-grandfather have all been lobstermen. She couldn't wait to get into the business.
I first got this idea when I was like 1 or 2, because my grandfather used to take me out a lot.
You're an official Maine lobsterman
Yes,
with a license and everything.
yes.
How you doing so far?
Well, pretty good.
I think so.
How much money you made?
$15.
Wow!
Kendra may take over her great-grandfather's business someday, but she may have to wait a while. Clayton may be almost 86, but he's still going strong.
I went to the doctor last month for my checkup, and he says, I just let a fellow out the hospital, he says, to go home, and he's 104 years old. And he says, I don't see why you won't live this long.
Clayton Johnson has slowed down a bit over the years, but now he's got a son, a grandson, and his great-granddaughter Kendra to help him out. As long as this family's around, the lobsters of Bailey Island don't stand a chance.
Here we go one.
Man, his claw came off.
Now, lobsters may get all the glory in the state of Maine, but mussels are catching up fast. We caught up with an old guy who raises the things down in South Bristol.
When you go up to Clark's Cove, you can't help but spotting an old guy by the name of Ed Myers. That's him, the one on the raft, wearing a bow tie and harvesting mussels. Ed graduated from Princeton in 1938. His classmates went on to become doctors and bankers and big businessmen, but Ed dropped out and moved to Maine. Why? Is he a down east Thoreau, a Huck Finn at sea, or just a guy who didn't want to chase the almighty buck?
Don't lead me down that path. I'd love to have... Who wouldn't want to have more money than he has? And we all think if we had it, we'd use it very wisely. And I'm not at all sure that I would. So here I am, and this is what I'm trying to do, is put out a good mussel.
Now, these aren't wild mussels. Ed grows them. In fact, this was the first official mussel farm in the country. These shellfish may be a big deal in Europe, but they're just catching on here in the States. And Ed says he's got a lot of work to do.
You don't take any months off then?
No. No, I'll steal a week in October.
You don't go to Florida in March and play shuffleboard, or?
Are you mad? With all this?
Ed's mussel farm is a pretty low-tech operation. The harvesting is all done by hand, and modern technology doesn't come into play until you get to the cleaning process.
What is this contraption? What is it?
That is a Maytag.
A Maytag washing machine?
Washing machine, about 1950.
It's the year I was born.
Ed may be in the mussel business, but he says there are enough untapped food sources on the coast of Maine to feed half the country. Seaweed, kelp, barnacles, who knows? The possibilities are endless. But someone else is going to have to take over the exploring. After 40 years, Ed says he's going to take a break.
Next March, I'm 75, and I'm preparing for a benign retirement in genteel poverty. And that's I know.
Sounds like good work if you can get it.
They say if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans for the next 2 years, and I guess this qualifies.
And on that note, we'll leave Clark's Cove, the mussels, and an old guy by the name of Ed Myers, who, when forced to philosophize, says simply, "I never tried to save the planet, I just tried not to insult it."
Another big business in Maine is blueberries. Each year, people buy 50 million pounds of these things. Most of them go into pancakes and muffins and pies. But a lot of them end up at a place called Bartlett's.
It's August, and the state of Maine is once again exploding with blueberries. You probably knew that, but do you know about Bartlett's, the world's largest producer of blueberry wine? The Bartlett Winery is located in Gouldsboro. It's sort of a mom-and-pop operation. The day we stopped by, Bob Bartlett was crushing blueberries and Kathy Bartlett was giving a tour. Now, this may look small-time, but it's not. These Bartletts have won wine-tasting competitions all over the world. Critics don't usually take fruit wines too seriously. Bartlett's blueberry is an exception.
They are always pleasantly surprised when they actually do the final tasting and see, and we dispel that, or try to dispel the myth that a fruit wine is something that's sweet, because it certainly doesn't need to be.
Now, when the Bartletts first started out, they tried to make grape wine, but grapes just wouldn't grow in these parts. It was too cold, so they had to come up with something else, something native to the state of Maine. They thought about lobster and potato and finally settled on blueberries. And the rest is history. And what a history it is. In 1983, the Bartletts made 600 gallons of wine. This year, they'll make 16,000, along with a campaign to fight wine snobbery and promote wine fun.
It's too bad. There should be a little more hedonistic approach to wine enjoyment instead of all these points and criteria that, you know, are covered in books. I mean, that's good, but there's a little too much emphasis placed on it. People should really have fun trying wine.
Now, if the Bartletts are doing so well, why don't they grow, expand, move to California and build an empire? That's the American way. What's the matter with these people?
I suppose we could get huge, but I mean, it's sort of, we moved out of the fast lane. We don't want to put ourselves back in the fast lane anymore. That's why we live here. That's why we work here.
You having fun?
I love it.
Right now, the blueberry harvest is in full stride, and for most people, that means muffins and pancakes and pies. Oh my! If you'd like to add wine to that list, you might want to stop by and see the Bartletts up in Gouldsboro. They've got a nouveau blueberry that'll knock your socks off.
Now, when the summer's over in Maine, we move into the fall foliage and fair season. My idea of a great time is to hop in the car, put on some classical music, and head up to the Freiburg Fair. In fact, that's just what we did a couple of years ago. I wouldn't call it work, but it did turn out to be a pretty good story.
Okay, we had a request to a number called Stoning Around. Yeah. Stoning around all over town. Stoning around. Stoning around.
I'd love to see a good winter. I'd like to see some snow.
Well, the Farmer's Almanac says it's going to be a bad one. How long you been here?
9 o'clock.
You've been here since 9?
Yeah, a little after.
You stayed too long at the fair.
Stoning around, acting like a clown.
Let you have all day off.
I'm on the clock right now.
You mean we're paying you?
They're paying me. They pay me to do this.
If Boston,
I don't have to retire.
I want to have a job like that.
Well, I'm stoning around.
Now, you can't get through a fall in Maine without having some apple cider. You can go to the store and get the stuff, or you can get it right off the press at one of the state's cider mills.
What better way to spend a fall afternoon than up at an old cider mill? How old? Well, no one's sure exactly, but legend has it the thing was built somewhere between 1904 and 1908. The place is run by 84-year-old Francis Babcock, has been since 1928. That's a lot of cider. Now, you might think a guy like this would have a lot of profound thoughts on apples, but not Mr. Babcock. He says that sort of stuff is for the poets and philosophers. For him, the cider business has just been a living, a good living.
Well, it's just like any farming thing. If you have a season, you go through it, and it's soon over with and away. You go on to doing something else.
Pretty simple, then.
Yes, it is very simple.
Back in the 20s, people used to line up around the block to get their apples pressed here at the Babcock farm. They used to put it in these giant 50-gallon wooden barrels. No more. Nowadays, we just go to the supermarket and get them in these handy plastic containers. Of course, times were different back then. Lots of people had apple trees, and cider was used as a soft drink, an alcoholic drink, and finally as vinegar. This mill used to turn out 1,500 gallons a day. Now it takes almost a season to produce that much, but regular customers say it's still the best.
When it's pressed out, it presses out to be a very clear cider. And the new mills don't do that. They grind the apples so fine that it's like baby food, and they pipe it through pipes. And the old mills still make the clear cider, and it has so much different flavor than the new mills do.
The Babcock Mill isn't a big money maker anymore, and the family keeps it around as much for tradition as anything else. How much longer do you think this mill's going to keep running?
I can't answer that.
Looks in good shape.
Well, the day might come when you couldn't get parts for it.
Let's hope that doesn't happen. If it does, we'll not only lose a great landmark, but some of the best cider around.
The apple harvest is big news in Maine, but the potato harvest is even bigger. In fact, up in Aroostook County, they have to have a 2-hour TV talk show every morning just to get them through the picking.
It's harvest time in Aroostook County. In the next 3 weeks, the people here will dig up 2 billion pounds of potatoes. Needless to say, these folks go to work early, but not before they watch a TV show called The Potato Pickers Special, starring John Logan.
Here's John Logan.
Yahoo! Holy lightning. Is this it? Are we here? We're here. Good morning out there, world. Potato Picker Special, 764-4461 is our number, and if you need us, why, holler.
The Potato Pickers Special is a down-home sort of public service show. Starts at 4:30, runs to 6:30 a.m. Its primary goal is to let workers know who's picking taters and who ain't.
Mike Sandstrom of Stockholm says, go to bed. Not going to dig today. Roll right over.
But the show also gives you news, sports, breakfast, and entertainment. Please welcome this year's Miss Potato Blossom, Betsy and Tweety.
Though the mountains divide and the oceans are wide, it's a small world after all.
Now, there's usually a lot of pull-your-hair-out pressure in the TV business. Not here on the Potato Pickers Special. This show is so laid back, it's like going to a local diner to get a cup of coffee and shoot the breeze.
There's an unsightly lump in the middle of that one. I'm not sure. You guys say, it's every man for himself when this happens, you know.
And why is this show so relaxed? Well, for one thing, there's no ratings race. WAGM is #1. In fact, it's the only one, the only TV station in Aroostook County. And that lets them do things their way.
We're not interested in glitz. What we're interested in is getting good information on the air and getting it on as timely as possible.
For 2 hours, John Logan bombards his viewers with potato news and potato views. Then at break time, they go to, you guessed it, potato commercials.
We have a commercial break we'll take right now. We'll come right back. Don't go away. It's about 13 minutes before 5 o'clock.
Hi, I'm Ty Ginman, and what you see here is a very important trademark. All you need to do is reach for this quality trademark, and sight unseen, you know you're getting the best.
Oh, we're back once again.
This show has been on the air for 30 years, probably be on for 30 more. You see, these people have a lot of work to do, but they can't do it without the Potato Pickers Special.
It's a small world after all. It's a small world after all. It's a small...
Let the harvest begin.
Now, Aroostook County is a pretty remote part of the state, but it's a metropolis compared to the Allagash. Henry David Thoreau toured the region back in 1857. We decided to retrace his steps and found that a lot of things haven't changed in 137 years.
Henry David Thoreau is best remembered for his writings at Walden Pond, an idyllic retreat where he lived alone, studied nature, and found the meaning of life. An existence so perfect, he must have been tempted just to stay there and live happily ever after. But Thoreau eventually left Walden Pond and began looking for new adventures. The theory at the time was, go west, young man. But Thoreau never cared much for following the crowd, so he didn't go west, he came north to the Maine woods. When Thoreau came to Maine, it must have been like trying to get to the end of the world. It took almost 4 days, and he had to travel by a combination of stagecoach, steamship, train, boat, and canoe. Today, with jet planes and four-wheel drive, he could have had breakfast in Boston and dinner by some remote mountain stream. There's no question it's easier to get to the North Woods now, but Ann Howe, who runs a sporting camp in these parts, says that a lot of things here haven't changed in 150 years.
What Thoreau found is still here. All you have to do is stop and look and mentally name the plants and the birds and things like that, and become aware of your surroundings. And then you'll find exactly the same thing that Thoreau found. It hasn't changed.
It's easy to get swamped when you're in a small boat, but that didn't seem to worry Thoreau too much. He was too busy inspecting flowers, studying plants, and keeping an eye out for animals, particularly moose. Thoreau was fascinated by moose. Said they reminded him of big, frightened rabbits. They are pretty strange-looking beasts, and most of the time they don't know whether to run away from you or just stand there and keep eating.
By the time he came to Maine, Thoreau had pretty much given up on modern civilization. He felt that most men were living lives of quiet desperation, so busy trying to get a bigger house, better food, and a more becoming wardrobe that they were missing out on the more important things in life, things like the Maine woods.
Chamberlain is the largest of the Allagash lakes. It's about 16 miles long, and from most parts of it you can get a great view of Katahdin, a mountain so spectacular that Thoreau said he dreamed about it for years. When Thoreau came to Chamberlain Lake, the only building was a place called Chamberlain Farm. That's gone now, but there is a pretty popular state-owned sporting camp on the lake. It's called Nugent's, and it's run by John Richardson and Reggie Webster, a pioneer couple if there ever was one. They say they're not here to make a good living, they're here to live good.
Most people that pursue money pursue it with the idea of attaining happiness, and I think that we've just taken a shortcut. Money is not the problem. It's we've realized that we can be happy without being rich.
Even with its problems, this area is still comparatively pristine. You can often go for miles up here without seeing another human being or any signs of civilization. It's almost like taking a trip back in time, even for the people who've never been here.
Sometimes it's just knowing that there is a place that is relatively wild, relatively unexplored, relatively remote, is satisfying to a lot of people, even though they never have to visit physically. They still know that there is a place you can escape, a place you can go for freedom, to unwind, to get away from the pressures of their everyday worker world.
People still talk about Thoreau here in the Maine woods. He was the original champion of this wilderness and felt the area had a great deal to offer. If Thoreau were alive today, I'm sure he'd tell young people to study hard and get all the education you can. And then with a wry smile, he'd probably also say, but don't forget to go to the Maine woods, because up there, you'll really learn something. Fall is a great time of year in Maine. It just doesn't last long enough. Winter moves in quick. One day the ground is bare, the next day you got a foot of snow. We got caught in just such a storm on the way to a lighthouse story in Lubec.
It looks like a giant candy cane dangerously perched on the easternmost tip of the United States. Welcome to West Quoddy Head. It's not the end of the world, but sometimes you can see it from here. The lighthouse was commissioned by Thomas Jefferson. Right now it's being run by bosun's mate Mac Roust. He took us to the tower, and we, naturally, asked if there had ever been any shipwrecks out on the treacherous Grand Manan Channel.
Over the centuries, yes, between here and Grand Manan, since 1754, there's been 200 reported wrecks.
None lately.
None since, I think the last one was maybe 1958.
And you can credit much of that safety record to the light keepers. They are a special breed, and they'll do whatever it takes to keep their light operational.
This light goes out in the middle of the night, and someone's depending on it, and they say, well, the light should be there, and they go out here on one of these reefs out here, and, well, that'd be it.
Now, at this point in the story, you're probably thinking, gee, the Coast Guard's got a pretty good system up there in Lubeck. Well, hold on. They're getting rid of it. You see, they're taking the light keeper out and replacing him with photoelectric cells and transistors. It's called automation, and a lot of people are questioning its safety.
An interesting thing happened during this storm. The combination of high winds and heavy snow knocked out the power, knocked out the generator, and knocked out the light. Fortunately, the light keeper was able to come down and jury-rig the system and get the power back on. Kind of makes you wonder what would happen if there were just a bunch of machines living out here.
The people of Lubeck are outraged by the plan and say the Coast Guard has made its budget more important than safety.
How much money is a human life worth? If anything happens here, and there's no one here to repair it. I should think one life would be worth all the machines on the coast. Good thought.
I mean, if that automation don't see what's going on out there, it just tells you where we are, where the land is. It don't tell you anything else.
Can machines ever really replace a man watching the ships out there on the water? Can they possibly replace it?
If I was going to sea in a small craft out here, I'd like to know there's some human being there making that light operate and making that horn blow.
The people of Lubeck say automation will also drive away tourists, hurt their economy, and increase vandalism at their famous lighthouse. The changeover is expected to be completed this spring, but the people of Lubeck are fighting it to the finish. They figure you need people in a lighthouse as much as you do machines.
29.52. I'll copy, over.
Coast Guard Westport Light Station, Coast Guard Station Jonesport, roger your weather. Have a good morning now, Coast Guard Station Jonesport out.
A lot of people think that fishing off the Maine coast is a romantic sort of endeavor. They might change their minds if they ever went to Eastport in January when it's 20 below.
This time of year, Eastport is sort of a cross between Ice Station Zebra and the end of the world. You'd think people here might spend their time huddled around a wood stove. They don't. You see, they're fishermen. 30 years ago, the Eastport-Lubeck area was one of the sardine capitals of the world and the subject of numerous U.S. fish and wildlife promotional films.
Once caught, the fish are removed from the net by a pump.
Yes, in those days, the area was riding high, but then the bottom fell out. Giant offshore draggers started catching the fish before they could reach the coast, and that put Eastport and its canneries out of business. George Harris remembers the good old days, the days of plenty.
Well, years ago, you didn't have the route and chase them. They come ashore. You could pitch them out with, I remember pitching them out with a pitchfork on the beach, the pollock. So it's, you got to do something different today, because I don't know where you'd go to catch a haddock from Eastport when there used to be tons from here.
Now, when the sardine plants closed, the people of Eastport were left with two options: either close up the town or find new jobs. Thanks to Yankee ingenuity, most of them found new jobs, not by catching fish like their ancestors did, but by raising them, sort of like cattle.
The fancy name for this is aquaculture, but folks here just call it fish farming. There are 13 of these operations in the Eastport, Lubec area. Most of them raise Atlantic salmon, millions of them, and that's created a lot of jobs. In 10 years, unemployment's gone from 26% down to 9%. Businessmen say the farms never could have made it without all the local seafaring expertise.
We've been very fortunate that the people have the maritime background, and the crew over there that's harvesting today, a couple of them came from the traditional fishery, another fellow came out of the Coast Guard. So we had a very strong base in which to draw employment from. They can run boats, they understand the water, so it was a very good switchover of the two industries.
What sets farm-raised fish apart is its freshness. In less than 3 hours, they're caught, cleaned, packed, and shipped. Many of them end up on a dinner table that same day. Now, you can't just start up a salmon farm anywhere. It takes special conditions. You need ice-cold water and huge 20-foot tides to wash out the pens and bring in new food for the fish. Much of Maine is perfect for these type of operations, but outside of Eastport and Lubec, this industry has barely scratched the surface.
We tend to think of the oceans of the world as representing a huge resource, but that's a myth, really, except for in a handful of places. The oceans are deserts. But there are a few places, and the Gulf of Maine is one of them, where there is tremendous natural biological productivity to be harnessed. And that's what the opportunity is for the aquaculture industry.
Right now, the Eastport area is on the cutting edge of the international aquaculture movement. Hopes are it will survive and spread along Maine's entire 3,000-mile coastline. If it does, the potential could be limitless. Biologists say our water is so fertile that if properly utilized, it could probably feed half the world.
There's a lot of things to do in Maine in the wintertime: skiing, skating, sledding. And for one man up in the Rangeley area, it's a good chance to get some free ice.
Mooselook-Maguntic is pretty quiet this time of year. The tourists have gone, temperatures drop below zero, and the only thing that interrupts the winter silence is the sound of the annual ice harvest. Past.
All of the people that come to work are certainly not doing it for the money. I think they're doing it because it's something that they've heard about through their grandparents and their fathers and whatnot, and they just love to come out here and cut ice. We get a lot of school children that are amazed by this, and it's fun for us. We enjoy it. It's hard work, but it's fun.
These days, the Philbrooks have a power saw and a conveyor belt to speed the harvest, but much of the work has to be done by hand, the same way they did it 70 years ago. In fact, Maine used to be an ice-cutting capital. Annual production topped 3 million tons a year, and it was shipped all over the world, from the Caribbean to the Orient. Mainers called it white gold. The empire collapsed after refrigeration, but not at Mooselook-Maguntic.
There's more than just nostalgia at work here. You see, the Philbrooks cut ice to save money. They figure, why buy refrigerators and use electricity when they can get all the ice they want out here for free?
Philbrook says refrigerators would cost him about $25,000, not to mention the hefty electric fees he'd be getting from the Central Maine Power Company. All things considered, he'd just as soon keep things cold the old-fashioned way, in his 8-foot-high, 3-foot-thick ice house. This is the largest ice-cutting operation in New England, but how long will it last? Will Steve Philbrook pass the business on to the next generation, or is he the last of the ice cutters?
Maybe it'll come to a halt someday, but I don't think it'll come to a halt because of lack of desire. So to answer your question, I think I'd like to continue as long as I can do it. And if my son wants to continue, more power to him.
Now let the ice boil you right out.
It's hard to imagine, but this ritual used to be as common as baling hay or picking corn. Now it's all but gone, replaced by modern technology and the fact that no one knows how to do it anymore.
Once a year, Maine turns into sort of a mini Alaska. That happens when the mushers come to Fort Kent for the annual 250-mile Can-Am dog sled race.
Welcome to Fort Kent, the last outpost in the final frontier. It's usually pretty quiet in these parts, except when the mushers come to town. That's when these hills come alive with the sound of huskies. It's called the Can-Am 250, a dog sled endurance race that's been known to make grown men cry. This year, 17 mushers are competing for $10,000 in prize money. The only rational question for these racers is, why do they do it? Let's start with Bob Hoyt, the mushing mailman from Ithaca, New York.
It's sort of an addiction. I got started in every year, every race. I swear I'm not going to do this to myself again. And next morning I wake up and figuring ways that I can do better next year.
Of course, everyone's out to get last year's champ, Andre Nadeau. Easier said than done. They say this guy would run over his own grandmother if she got in the way of the finish line.
On dirait que tout le monde court après toi. C'est tout le monde te vise.
He says being a champion is a doable thing, but once you are champion, then everybody wants to bump you off, and he says that puts some kind of a pressure on him.
Now, last year, the mushers had to contend with a 15-inch snowstorm and temperatures that dropped to 38 below zero. This year, they may have to break out the suntan lotion.
The race was set for Saturday, 9 a.m. The mushers lined up on Main Street, so did the fans. Sort of like a Hollywood movie, Sergeant Preston meets Call of the Wild. The racers were anxious, the dogs could hardly wait.
3, 2, 1, and they're off!
Most of the mushers got to the first checkpoint late Saturday. The dogs spent the break eating and sleeping while the racers tried to figure out what to do about the 30-degree temperatures. Nice weather for people, but the huskies were overheating and sinking through the snow. Penny Gray was in third place, but already worried about her dogs.
What are your thoughts so far on the race?
It's been hot.
Does that bother you more or the dogs, do you think?
It bothers the dogs a lot. It's really hard for them to go through stuff like this, you know, the heat.
By the time we got to checkpoint 3 at the Maybeck logging camp, the temperature was up to an unbelievable 50 degrees and rising. The vets were getting real worried about the dogs' heat exhaustion. The symptoms?
Dogs vomiting, don't want to eat, don't want to drink, losing a lot of fluids, say with diarrhea, vomiting. Those dogs, too, I'd like to keep here until they get back on their feet.
By mid-afternoon, the temperature got up to an unheard-of 62 degrees. The trails were falling apart, the rivers were going underwater, and the judges had no choice but to call things off.
Canceling the race is due to the rivers are not passable, they're dangerous, and the dogs have been going through the ice, very dangerous, and they do not even want Andre to leave Maybeck. He will be place number 1 as if he would have come to the finish line.
Hard to believe. Last year it was 38 below. This year it was 62 above. Talk about a meltdown. That's a 100-degree difference. What in the world can we expect next year? A typhoon?
First place goes to Andre Nadeau. Andre Nadeau. Andre Nadeau.
Now, when things start thawing out, the sap starts running, and it's time for maple syrup. Time for a visit with Ted Green over in East Sebago.
It comes after winter and before the Red Sox. It is sapping time, a New England tradition, and one that's been in Ted Green's family for 5 generations.
What kind of year has it been so far? We're about midpoint right now.
It's been great, a real good start, one of the best starts, and probably one of the first times since 1982 that we'll even hit our average, our 30-year average.
Which is?
About a quart of syrup per tap.
At that rate, how many gallons do you get out on an average year?
About 125 gallons in that vicinity. It's a long, hard row to haul. By the time you get your sap gathered and get it in here to the sap house and get it processed without burning the pans, and so it's quite a job, really, even with the new modern equipment.
I got to tell you, there's nothing like that smell. That is unbelievable.
If we could can the smell, the aroma that's coming off from the pans, and sell that instead of the syrup, I think we could probably retire quite soon.
How do you explain people's fascination with it?
I think that's, if you take all the things that we do in making maple syrup, it's probably meeting people, and we're learning from them as well. We enjoy that as much as we do making the syrup, probably.
They say it's not spring until you've tasted the new maple syrup. If you get the urge, Ted Green would love to see you.
There's another spring tradition here in Maine that involves something called fiddleheads. And no one knows more about that subject than a man they call the Fiddlehead King of Waldo County.
Each year at this time, Darrell Gibbs takes his family on a treasure hunt. Deep into the woods they go in search of the wily fiddlehead. Of course, they always find them. You see, fiddleheads can hide, but they can't run. Not from Darrell Gibbs they can't, because he's the Fiddlehead King of Waldo County.
Can't bend over like I used to.
Darrell and his wife Helen have been picking fiddleheads for 40 years now. Needless to say, they've got it down to a science.
The tighter they're woven like that, the better they'll freeze, because the water don't get soaked in on so much. That hull never did kill anybody, but it don't look good.
In a good year, the Gibbs pick about 2,000 pounds of these ferns. Some they sell, the rest go into fiddlehead donuts, fiddlehead pies, and fiddlehead soup. The soup helps you sleep, don't you know?
You get a good dish of that hot fiddlehead soup, and you eat that with some crackers, and time you get that eaten, and you're ready to go to bed and sleep.
Now, I really don't know where we are right now. That's because Darrell Gibbs won't tell me. You see, this is one of his favorite fiddlehead patches, and in these parts, you wouldn't tell anybody about a fiddlehead patch any more than you would a good fishing hole. If you did, half of Waldo County would be down here picking.
But that's not to say the Fiddlehead King is greedy, quite the opposite. He'll pass on his knowledge to anyone, as long as they understand and respect the woods.
See that one right there, that's a good example. See that, right underneath there, there's a whole handful of fiddleheads that you never even see, but they're under the log.
Darrell Gibbs has spent his life in the woods, fishing, sapping, digging night crawlers, you name it, he's done it. His only rule is don't take more than you need. Right now, he needs a few more fiddleheads, says there's another good patch just up the stream.
The fishing season also starts in the springtime. Now, I could tell you some tales about trout and perch, but you've probably heard them all before. What you may not have heard is the story about the alewives of Damariscotta Mills.
Each year at this time, the alewives return to Damariscotta, millions of them. Their journey starts at the sea and ends at this tiny mill pond where they spawn. That may sound easy, but it's not. They got to get past the predators. They got to go up the waterfall. And finally, they got to stay away from Frank Waltz. You see, he's in charge of harvesting these fish, has been for about 30 years. 100 years ago, these alewives used to be quite popular. Nowadays, most people don't even know what they are.
Well, an alewife, I was told, was a twin to a herring. And we use them for lobster bait, 90% of them, and there's still a few people that smokes them. and there's still a few people that eat some fresh.
Good tasting fish or bony or?
They're bony, but they're good tasting, either way.
The fishing rights to this stream are owned by a small power company. Frank is its official dipper. Each day he scoops up several barrels full of these fish and sells them to the locals.
The regulations for this harvest were set up back in 1809, and they included something called the Widow's Clause. That meant that any woman who lost her husband through death or disease was entitled to 2 bushels of free fish. That law was written 183 years ago, but even today, a few widows still stop by for their free alewives.
Now, Frank doesn't catch all these fish. He actually helps a lot of them get back to their spawning ground. That tradition started back in 1850 when the town fathers built a series of holding pools to help the alewives get back up the waterfall. Of course, if they don't take a right turn at the fork in the river, they never see the waterfall. They see Frank.
Well, I call them right-handed and left-handed fish. If the right-handed ones go to the right, they go up the lock streams up into the lake and spawn. And the left-handed ones go to our traps and we catch them.
The moral is don't be left-handed.
Don't be left-handed, no, not down here.
The alewife season will be over in a few weeks. The harvest is down this year, probably because of the late spring. Frank says they may have better luck next year. And there's always a next year for the alewives.
The alewives usually return just before Memorial Day. That means it's almost time for summer. That's where we started this show, so that's where we'll end it. For now, I'm Bob Elliott. Maybe I'll see you next time on Profiles of Maine.